who said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. But thou shalt be brought down to Sheol, to the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. Sorry we had a couple days where we missed here because I have some scheduling difficulties that also mean that today's going to be a short study, but I wanted to get one in. And I think then things should continue as normal, which means I updated the website last night to reflect the fact that the Bible study is live sometime between 7 and 11 a.m., so it's more accurate. And also there's I've got a new video coming on my other channel today, and there's a song already on my website. If you go to the Culture War Songs page, that's going to be dropping here. You can get an early peek. This is like the Insider's early track. Anyways, if that sort of thing is interesting to you. Anyways, let's read Daniel chapter 5. The new song you should be looking for is Welcome to Sodom. All right, I'll put that one in Daniel 5. Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was at Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against another. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, Whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were astonished. Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in thy kingdom, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom. Light and understanding and wisdom. I read that right. It just sounded like it is an odd construction. Like the wisdom of the gods was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, thy father, made men. Hold on a second. I got to read that sentence over. Let's just start from the semicolon. Whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. And then was Daniel brought in before the king. And the king spake and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Jewry? I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing, and make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of thee that thou canst make interpretations, and dissolve doubts. Now if thou canst read the writing, make known to me the interpretation thereof. Thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto thee. I'm sorry, I read without reading. I was predicting. Read the writing unto the king, and make known unto him the interpretation. O thou king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he slew, and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. 1 second. That was more involved than I expected. Pardon me, and now we'll continue again. Whomsoever he will. And thou his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thy heart, though thou knewest all this, but hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. And they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives and thy concubines, have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold and of brass and iron, wood and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know. And the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene. God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Tekel. Thou art weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres. Thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So there we go. And thus we have the saying, the writing on the wall. You know, it was funny to me for years that growing up, I didn't realize so many of our idioms and sayings come from the Bible. And our direct, like, we go the extra mile. That's Jesus' command. He said, whoever will compel you to go a mile, go with him twain. Oh, don't you see the handwriting on the wall? It usually means, that means like it's obvious that the end is near. It's obvious that, and that's what we'll talk about, right? It's like I think one of the key phrases to this chapter is that when Daniel says, you knew all these things. You knew about Nebuchadnezzar, your father. And I was speculating before. I wasn't sure if this was his grandson or son. And I could have been wrong when I said grandson, but the only reason I'm bringing it up is because when it says father, it doesn't necessarily mean, they'll say David, your father, to grandchildren of David and stuff like that. They didn't have a separate word for grandfather, or let's say a special word. They would just say, they would call him your father because he's just an earlier father. My father's father, whatever. So, because that is not necessarily indicative, and it would be elsewhere where I'd be getting that idea. And like I said, since we're not going to labor that point, we're not going to try to figure it out because that would be tedious in the study of this format. It's something I should show up knowing if I want to make a big deal about it. Okay. He knew better. That's what makes it bad. The story is pretty straightforward, right? He's tasting the wine. He's tasted the wine. I think there's something there that means, he's had a few to drink. And this is the thing, that's always sucks about alcohol. You know that when the way it affects you, you're different. You don't make good decisions when you drink. Right? But you are held accountable anyways, even though you're not in your right mind, because you chose to drink, and it puts you in a position where you don't make good decisions. And it's a bitter pill. It's it's a bitter poison. It it has that upside that everyone understands. It feels good, numbs the pain, but it also destroys you. And physically and mentally, and it can cause you to make catastrophically bad decisions. Like jumping in your car when you shouldn't. So, his decision is to bring in the holy vessels from the house of God, from the temple of the Jews. Nebuchadnezzar didn't just have that experience where he was turned into a beast mentally or whatever, It makes me think of almost like a hypnotist. Was Daniel a hypnotist? No, I wouldn't say that, but the Lord could definitely put someone under that kind of a thing, just like many other things that happen to people, things that befall us. Those things are also, just like when, Joseph, when he was cast into slavery, what was his response? Actually, God purposed all that to save everybody. It's like me becoming a slave was secondary to saving everyone else. Sometimes that's the attitude the Pharisees took about Jesus. Sometimes one man has to die that the nation won't perish. Suffering can be in it for us. That's why when people deny, when Christians talk about, we'll never go through the tribulation, it's such a wrong-headed thing. Christians are going through tribulation right now, as horrible as anything you can imagine as far as suffering. What people don't understand about what's perilous about the end times, it's not that like it's more yes, there are plagues and all that, and people look at that. Yes, okay. But there are plagues right now that people are dying from. Horrific deaths. Cruel things people are doing one to another. What makes that different that time is the temptation, the perilousness. Because, like I said, when everyone can talk how they believe in, oh, I'm independent. I don't do this, and I don't just do what I'm told or whatever. You can say I'm a free thinker, whatever. But then when something like the pandemic hits, and whatever you think you are is challenged, and that kind of stress sort of reveals who you really are. It's sort of when you're put to the test, it kind of shows. It's like, okay, I mean, like for Peter, that was a bitter test. He found out, I'll deny him. I'll deny him. Oh my God, that's not what I want to do. That's the most horrific revelation of one's character. You know what I mean? Not that, but having experienced it, for some people, it's a catastrophic destruction. But for others, it's a catastrophic removing of an edifice so that something new can be built. An edifice, a false sort of bravery or whatever, a false, let's call it morality, whatever form it takes, false integrity to what you believe in. It gets swept away in tribulation. The prophets speak of this. I tell you, Isaiah 28. The overwhelming scourge that passes through, and it sweeps away the lies that you live under and shows who you are and what the truth is. And so, if we find ourselves like Peter, having found, we didn't do what we now think we should have done. Don't necessarily give it to despair, but it's just, okay, well, I mean, some people will, like I look at the difference between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. They're both profane people who don't, and it's like, everyone's going to worship my statue or be thrown in the fire. There's a kind of a belligerent, religious, you'll do, they think of them. There's a reason why some of the most, let's say, what do I want to call it? Popular. But like the passages that the New Testament points to from the Old Testament passage that the New Testament points to as being understanding the nature of Antichrist. As being that sort of a thing. Because when Paul talks about, that man of sin, until that, that day will not come, the day of Christ's return, or of our being gathered to him. That day, us gathering to Christ, that's not coming, and nor is Christ coming, until the man of sin be revealed. This is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. It's pretty one of the clearer passages that sort of makes, I mean, there isn't a passage, a similar passage, I think, in many other debates that so decisively really should be the end of the argument, but it isn't. And that shows you, like I said, you got to compensate for, I mean, I'm sure they have an explanation. And part of which is ignoring the fact that the subject is about the gathering together to him and us. It's not about tribulation, saints, or any silly thing like that. Anyways, I don't really want to get off on that debate because, whatever, it's like, it's not a thing that, I don't think that believing one way or the other is the key. I mean, like, if you believe in the rapture, it's not, that in and of itself is not a problem so much as if you have this sort of weird attitude that you think that bad things can't happen and you won't be expected to go through tribulation or perhaps suffer and even die for the sake of the Lord, that somehow the integrity of the bride of Christ requires you to never go through anything. I think that's the most absurd nonsense that any group of people has ever bought into mentally. The tribulation just isn't for them. That's wrong. The wrath of God is not for you, but there is a lot of things short of the wrath of God. And here's the thing. Let me tell you something. What happens in the wrath of God? What happens to people? What happens? they get killed, right? Usually, right? They fall into holes in the ground, big rocks out of heaven hit them in the head. Maybe bolts of lightning. Maybe millions of frogs climbing down their throat. Plagues, right? They die. I'm trying to, what's it? Okay, what happens to saints in the tribulation? I mean, they talk about they die. And what happens to saints outside of the Great Tribulation? What has happened historically? They've been tortured. They've been sawn asunder. Cut. What, you think you're special? In what way, precisely? Honestly, the only specialness we could possibly possess is we're too pampered and like this Belshazzar, too profane in our outlook to even warrant the merit, the grace of God, which of course you can't warrant anyways, thank God. So that's why we are saved, okay? In spite of the fact that we are the most pampered generation and nation, it's like this nation, not the generation alive on the earth, they aren't all pampered. There's some intense suffering going on. Some people are being brutalized, while others live in luxury and complain about their genders and nonsense, Because it's definitely like a first world problem. It's definitely like a pampered people, Sodom and Gomorrah, pride, fullness of bread, abundance of idleness. That's the problem. These were the sins of thy sister Sodom, pride, fullness of bread. It's funny, we call it Pride Month. That's, by the way, that's my song. I talk about pride. I don't talk about it much, actually. But it's funny, they call it pride. Yeah, it's pride. One of the 7 deadly sins of the Catholics. They call it the Queen of Sins. I say they because it's like just that's what people... But people aren't wrong. Some traditions make a lot of sense. We aren't just proud of who we are. We're proud of the good of the things. We take pleasure and feel ourselves elevated in doing good and in pleasing God. That's what makes me feel elevated. That's what lifts me up, because it is not I that lift myself up, but God lifts me up through his approval. But when men don't fear God, or men, because here's the thing, people will, for the sake of the fear of other men, refrain from doing things. I might get caught. There's that. That like I talk about that a lot. That's not a very strong morality. You put a little pressure on that, and that guy suddenly, I would never steal. All of a sudden, it's like, you mean there's no consequences? Steal, I will. They just do. You mean if I can murder anybody I want and not have to pay the price? Oh, sign me up. Some people, their morality is not only, but in some aspects of all of us, it may be true. There may be things we would do, but for fear of other men, obviously as Christians, we should be far from that. Our fear is towards God. I'm just saying, in my character as a human being, there were certainly, when I was younger, there were things I didn't do mostly because I thought of other people. Or what, I might get caught, I might get in trouble. I didn't develop a sophisticated Christian perspective on things. I'm going to make sure I'm at the right time. Watch the time. I only got 15 more minutes. So Belshazzar saw his father go through that, humiliation and return, and he probably would have been intimately. The king is gone off and eating straw and like an animal, and he saw all that, and yet he got drunk and thought, and this is, the funny thing is, human beings are kind of predictable because they have a thought process that just goes in a particular direction. When it comes to corruption, when they don't fear God, they just think, what crazy, off the wall, unexpected thing I could do that they say you shouldn't do. It's interesting. Like, it's just interesting to me that people they get up to such evil, and it's for pleasure, and the doing of evil. The more evil it is, they derive greater pleasure from it. It's like with sexual perversion. The more perverse, that's the point. For some people, it's like they just want the maximum transgression, which makes you wonder, like, how can you even see the thing about it. The problem, years ago, I said, I'm like, I didn't fight against or anything, but I was like, I didn't think the Defense of Marriage Act was a good idea. Because what the problem is, you have a proposition where you're being lied to. And they say, we just want to be married. We just want to live like normal people, everyone's like, well, they just want to enter into normal society. They just these different people who want to be like just normal, couples, with kids and raising them and family life and all that. And we're denying it to they're broken in some inexplicable way we don't understand. And we're denying them the happiness they could have in this one life that we all get. It's like, right? But, and maybe there are people who feel that way. Well, I'm willing to live and let live in the hopes that people will come to repentance. And as long as they're not harming other people, and I don't see why it's something I should be, or society should even be interrupting or getting in, into people's private affairs. I have things I want to do private that I don't want interfered with, and so the less of that, the better, I say, as far as government interfering and authority and totalitarianism. But we've been lied to. That's not what they wanted. That's not what they wanted. Not all. I mean, like I said, there are some, but there are a good number who want the normalization of all perversion. But that kind of ruins perversion, doesn't it? How does it still become transgressive? You know how? Because you still know it's transgressive. Because God exists. And there's a sort of a baseline of knowledge. It's like, no, it's wrong. You can never convince people it's right. I mean, you'll convince some people to do it and corrupt them thereby. And men of corrupt minds will do all kinds of things and say they'll call good evil and evil good. But when you're talking about these things where the transgressive part of it is part of the excitement, it sort of proves itself. Drinking, why did he call for the vessels of the house of the Lord at this particular moment? Having this huge feast in front of 1,000 lords. Why now? Why suddenly do you want, because why does he want to do that? Is he just like, bring me those pretty cups I saw? No, it's not just bring me those pretty cups in the storage room. He knows what they are and does this, I have no doubt, intentionally to be transgressive and defile them. Because by now, he would know about the Jews and their particularness and their clean and unclean. And, they probably had made a big fit about it when they were taken. And maybe Nebuchadnezzar did not destroy the vessels. And so took them as booty. And, a lot of times, here's the thing, and this is very true. And this is why Belshazzar's feast is interesting too, because, like I said, he knew. And, what was it? Like, people of, like, it's perfectly believable to think that Nebuchadnezzar would have had some reverence for the vessels of the house of the Lord. Because but as this is some God's stuff. So we're taking it, but we're taking it respectfully. But it would be like, we're going to take this God to be with us now. It's going to be our power. You guys, obviously, he's let us come here and destroy you all. So we're taking him captive too. And he wouldn't, And he would regard it like the other gods. And that's why he would boast over what God is there that can, that can stand it. And like I was saying before, and I didn't quite get to the point about when I talk about 2 Thessalonians and stuff, that draws on imagery of the king of Babylon from Isaiah, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sits in the temple of God, showing that he is God. That's why I brought up 2 Thessalonians in the first place, not to talk about the rapture, but to talk about one who stands in the temple of God, claiming to be God. Where does that idea come from? Did the Holy Spirit just inspire that fresh in the mind of the Apostle Paul? Or was he drawing on things he also understood from the Scriptures? And of course, he was drawing on things he understood from the Scriptures. That's why I played Isaiah chapter 14 at the opening of this study, because that's the passage. Belshazzar, because Nebuchadnezzar didn't meet doom. He was victorious. He died, maybe I'll get to meet the fellow. I don't know, right? He seemed to have his mind operating properly at the end of his life. It happens. His son, seeing that example, continuing in the ways of his father, is not afforded the same opportunities of repentance. That's why I say it's a dicey thing when you have knowledge to trifle with God and to trifle with sin. I never think God doesn't forgive me of any sin I've ever committed. But I just don't want to be in the midst of doing something and feeling of a conscience mind, I've said this many times and people probably think it's a funny thing I say, but what I'm doing when I'm killed kind of matters. Like I said, if I had a heart attack, I've never seen a prostitute, but if I had a heart attack while seeing a prostitute, committing adultery on my wife, I would think the Lord was not happy with me. Maybe the soul would be saved yet so as by fire, but I'm like, I don't know. I don't think anyone should worry too much about me at that point, honestly. I'm a big jerk if that's the case. All right. Whatever. But what if I did it and then I don't die, but I repent? Can I be forgiven? Yes, but I shouldn't tempt God. Don't jump off the temple just because you might live. That's the thing with sin. You play around with it, right? And it gets you. Well, Belshazzar should know better. But he calls for the vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. His princes, his wives, and his concubines. He's got a big party there with all 1,000 people. Right? They're drinking out of the vessels and probably, being drunk and praising the gods of gold and silver and brass, iron, and wood of stone. But I wonder if it sounds like almost like a reverse auction type thing where people are like, the gods of silver, of gold, gold. And they're like, and silver, like silver. But they get down, they start laughing because they get to the more base things. Or maybe they start at stone and then they go up. I don't know. Or maybe they are not praising literally the gods of gold, silver, brass, and iron, and wood, and stone, but rather literally praising gods, or gods that are literally made of gold, made of silver, made of brass, made of iron, and made of wood, and made of stone. They're talking about the materials that the gods are made of. That's what's recorded. But actually, they could have been praising the names of those gods. They just started praising Marduk and Bel and Chemosh and was it Moloch or whatever, right? I don't know. That's just a thought, because I was always like, it's kind of an odd thing to praise the gods of gold, because I was saying, it's the gods, like you have the gods of the thunderstorm and the gods of the, right? The gods of the harvest, and then we have the gods of gold and the gods of silver. Or is that maybe just the gods of, You know what I mean? Like, is that what they're talking about? That's how I always read it. It's really easy to think of it that way. But I think we may have had the wrong take on that. Maybe it's just the way he's writing about it from a Jew's perspective. They praise the gods of gold, of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and stone. That's what they're made of. They praise those gods, not the true God. They drank out of the vessels of the house of the true God and praised gods that were no gods. And that's true in either case, and I do favor that interpretation. Well, then came forth the fingers of a man's hand and wrote on the wall. Okay. We've talked about the whole thing quite a bit. And I have to go in 5 minutes, so we're going to end right now. What we're going to do, I don't know what verse I'm going to pick it up with. I think we're going to, I want to talk about it a little more because there's parts of it we didn't really get to. It was a good study in any case, and we will pick it up somewhere. We'll probably read the whole thing and then pick it up somewhere along the line. We'll finish talking about it tomorrow. How about that? Let's just say that. I do think we will finish talking about it tomorrow. I want to talk about some of these things. There's definitely more. I don't know if we'll finish talking about it tomorrow, but we'll talk about some more tomorrow. How about that? And maybe we'll finish it. And we'll decide where we're gonna pick it up from later today. So thanks for joining me. I'm sorry it has to be a short study. I'll be back again tomorrow, Lord willing, and scheduling issues, etc., etc. Until then, tagline.
Who said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. But thou shalt be brought down to Sheol, to the side.